We are ANN, and this is Planet Talk.
Today is May 9, 2021, and I'm your host today, Renn Butler. Thank you very much for tuning in. I want to talk briefly about the horrific bomb attack in Kabul, Afghanistan, and then look at 5 major narratives around vaccines that are very common out there right now, both pro and against, and what I see as a common archetypal thread of those narratives, which we can see reflected in the Saturn Uranus square happening in the sky right now. What could prompt these fanatics in Afghanistan to do something so brutal and vicious and cowardly as to attack girls coming home from school? It just seems like the cruelest, most bestial kind of action that we can possibly imagine. There are pictures of piles of bloody school books and shoes and things, and just the thought of people sending their children off to school and then to see those images on the news is just like a Terminator archetype. I want to look at some of the possible perinatal roots of that vicious strain of patriarchy that seems to be aimed at women, and see if that can add some plausible information to this question as to why people act that way. So this is the Groff-Tarnas perinatal sequence. The work of Stan Groff and Rick Tarnas. I put together this schema. Some of you have seen it. Now, what we know about the psyche so far, and this is based on Stan Groff's expanded cartography of the human psyche, is that our unconscious contains powerful leftover memories from infancy to the present. This he calls the biographical layer of the psyche, or postnatal memories. Below that are very intense, unprocessed emotions and energies from our experience of birth and our confrontation with death. He calls this the perinatal layer. And then deeper than that are transpersonal memory systems and access to archetypes, mythological terrains, past lives, and so on, collective memories, phylogenetic memories. One of the important roots of extreme sociological phenomena, such as bloody revolution, genocide, totalitarianism, Groff suggests is in this perinatal layer of the psyche. This second perinatal matrix connected with Saturn is a very powerful imprint in our lives of experiences of victimization, a sense of no exit, constriction, and unbearable suffering, but the cervix is still closed at this stage, and there's no way out and no possibility of changing the situation. In basic perinatal matrix 3, connected with Pluto, the cervix is now open, and the fetus is being pressed through the narrow birth canal by very powerful uterine contractions. There is an activation of intense aggressive energies, like volcanic types of aggression. When in sessions, people can have explosive discharges of aggression, consuming it from a finite pool in their psyches. And Groff suggests, and many other people who have confronted this layer in their psyches agree, that this is a very important source of aggression that we see acted out in human society. This is the type of aggression that Erich Fromm called malignant aggression. It's aggression we don't need to survive as a species. It's extra, and it's a kind of a pathological negative force in society. People can have sexual feelings in this stage of the birth connected with the choking in the birth canal. There can be confrontation with demonic archetypes. There can be scatological experiences, nausea and vomiting, as people are processing these unprocessed memories from birth labor. And finally, purification by fire or pyrocatharsis. It is the aggressive elements and the demonic that I think share the most information about these kinds of brutal sectarian and patriarchal acts of violence. It seems that I'll just preface this with the observation that the positive intrauterine state before labor contractions, BPM1 or basic perinatal matrix 1, connected with Neptune, and the ecstatic sense of freedom and breakthrough and escape from constriction of the completed birth, BPM4, connected with Uranus. These are both very strong imprints in us of the positive side of the feminine principle. When people are in touch with BPM1 or BPM4 in their lives, they tend to be happy, they have a sense of security, they have very positive feelings toward life, toward incarnation, toward existence in general. They are not afraid of the future. They know that because this memory of surviving birth and then making it through, passing through a difficult situation, then surviving, this memory system creates a deep faith that we can survive difficult situations and make it through. And so people have an optimism about the future and their capacity to survive difficulties. However, when people are primarily influenced by memory systems rooted in these stages of labor, of the no exit stage of BPM2 connected with Saturn, and the dynamic stage BPM3 connected with Pluto, they will tend to have a more unhealed negative view of the feminine principle, capital F feminine principle of life, of incarnation, of their bodies, of their sexuality, of existence in general. And when people have these unhealed memory systems, their spirituality will tend to be of a hyper transcendent or transcendentalist form. All the emphasis will be on escaping the prison of materiality, of the samsara, of the material world, of getting beyond incarnation. There's a very poor view of present life, of what it is to be incarnate, embodied, living in the world of form. And in the patriarchal monotheistic religions essentially replaced or attempted to replace many of the experiential practices that their ancestors had used for millennia to process out leftover perinatal energies, to finish the process, to work through the undigested material and reach a positive resolution, to work through birth trauma, face death, and to increase the access to these blissful states before the birth and after the birth. But that creates a negative feedback loop. So when people don't have access to those healing techniques, so it's all about the book, reading the book. It's either the Old Testament, or it's the Bible, or it's the Quran, and sort of the moral and intellectual control, and many would say that was a necessary stage in human evolution. But when there's so much focus on this sort of on the mental control and on reading and on words in a book, and we don't have access to the experiential healing techniques, then people's birth trauma festers away inside and creates a negative view of incarnation, of the feminine, of matter, mother, of the the embodied state. And so it just kind of reinforces it. People don't have access to the healing, and then that creates sustains a negative view of the feminine side of life. I believe that the kind of vicious behavior of these, the sort of patriarchal fanatics like we are seeing in Afghanistan has deep roots in these unhealed stages of labor. There's a profound fear of the feminine when these have not been processed, a feeling that one never should be out of control again. There's a deep fear of losing control and what the feminine can do to us. The mother's body is so much more powerful than the fetus. And I believe that this is a powerful memory system in the patriarch's psyches, and people will then tend to project that onto women in the world around them, onto women, onto girls, in this case of this bombing, and a desire to kind of suppress the feminine, to gain control over the feminine ascendancy. And it is, in a sense, a way of trying to never be out of control again. The Greeks, who were, the classical Greeks were, midway, as in a sense, through the 5,000-year patriarchal era, which we're just ending. So they were certainly, masculine oriented, we could say, in their mainstream parts of their culture. But even they held that the highest forces in the universe were feminine, the highest forces in the cosmos, that they were the three fates, the Moirai. And it's often said in Greek mythology, often stated, that they're stronger even than Zeus, more powerful than Zeus. But the monotheistic religions could not accept that, and have attempted to assert a masculine deity as the highest power in the universe. Now, the thing about BPM-3, and this is strongly activated right now in the collective psyche, there's a lot of discussion right now about the Saturn-Uranus square, which is a very powerful world transit happening right now. But we are still in the Saturn-Pluto conjunction through December. It comes back within that 15-degree orb later on this year, and then moves beyond 15 for the final time in December. And so this very strongly activated Pluto, kind of the grimmer side of Pluto, the entrenched, scary side of Pluto, the inflection from Saturn. And the thing about this activated BPM-3 is that the aroused feelings of aggression in these memory systems look for some kind of target. Now, in self-exploration, we realize that we have to unilaterally withdraw our aggressive energies from our social lives, from our relationships, from our politics, and aim them at transcendence. This is a process that happens as we heal ourselves, and we realize that where that energy, it wants to, in a sense, go in the direction that the feminine, the mother, the great mother goddess is pushing us, which is toward transcendence, toward the higher chakras, toward getting out of the birth canal. When we do that, then we paradoxically are able to be more in our bodies and live more in our emotions and the embodied state. But in the BPM-3 experiences, we're in a state where we're trying to escape something and we need to complete that. When people don't have access to experiential techniques like deep breath work, responsible use of psychedelics, trance dancing, fasting, meditation, and others, then that aggression will tend to aim at external targets. And groups like the Taliban and Al Qaeda and other of this most extremist forms within Islam, and there are extremes within all human groups, not just Islam, will often aim at the feminine and also at Mother Nature. We see that in our modern civilization, even atheists. There's this war against Mother Nature, and these unprocessed perinatal energies are a very powerful source of those drives and motivations and all that aggressive energy against Mother Nature, against the feminine. It's just beyond tragic what is happening in Afghanistan, and with the US troops pulling out soon, it's quite possible and quite probable that they will revert to a more medieval kind of social system. And it just doesn't seem like there's much that can be done about that. It's a very depressing situation, and I think it is partly a reflection of that Saturn-Pluto conjunction, that Pluto empowering the Saturn archetype of reactionism, of going backwards, the empowered conservative impulse that we've seen the last several years, also in like American politics. But the long-term solution, I believe, will be if experiential techniques, including the legalization of psychedelics in psychotherapy, spreads more around the world, that will, if deep work is being done, that will decrease the total amount of these powerful, aggressive energies within the collective psyche. And that can only help situations like in Afghanistan, which, looks like it's set to become one of the worst places on earth to be female, as well as liberal or free thinking and many other things. The powerful Dionysian energies connected with Pluto in BPM-3, Grof calls this Dionysian type of ecstasy, when people are experiencing this, or volcanic ecstasy, tends to be associated with women in many males or patriarchs' minds. The women are the ones who are giving birth. Women's sexuality is more unpredictable and causes male ego suffering, and a desire to control it. Freud referred to women's psychology as the dark continent, projecting his own sort of unprocessed BPM-3 material. And this is what the patriarchs are projecting onto women, their own unprocessed volcanic material, in the death rebirth struggle in the birth canal. And I believe this is also a very powerful root of the projection by, for example, white supremacists onto African Americans, people of color. Africa was often called the dark continent by the 19th century colonial Europeans. And it's the same energy, this feeling that there's sexual energy, there's uncivilized, untamed, wild energies in certain groups, and that we, the white supremacists or the white Europeans, will control that and sort of pave it over and live a civilized life on top of that pavement. But that is unsuccessful, partly because people that feel that way are then cruel and inhuman toward people of color, that they're projecting that onto, and also because their own lives become impoverished and unhealthy and disconnected from nature and natural energies and the primal natural forces within the universe that help to animate us and give our lives meaning. And so there's been a project to give Freud credit since the time of Freud, though, he took some small steps to reclaim that side of our lives, the unconscious, the energies of our psyches. And this is the real way forward for solving both the problem of sexism and racism, I believe. Before I forget, I'll share my t-shirt with you. I got this at Value Village. It's I'm actually in my 3/4 life crisis right now, maybe 2/3 very optimistic view. I just turned 61 several weeks ago. So now I want to talk a little bit about vaccines and the culture wars. This is based closely on an article I just wrote in the Archetypal Astrology and Transpersonal Psychology group on Facebook. If you're not a member, you might want to join that. So vaccinations in the time of Saturn Uranus, variations on an archetypal theme. So Saturn Uranus very much in the picture right now, with a lot of division and extremism, fanaticism in the collective psyche, the sort of polarities, dualities. It's being intensified, though, by the Saturn conjunct Pluto, which, as I said, is still operative through December. So one of the features of Saturn-Uranus combinations is a tense and intensified either or, awake Uranus, asleep Saturn, rebellious, afraid, liberated, constricted polarity. So awake, asleep, rebellious, afraid, liberated, constricted. You can see Uranus, Saturn in all of those examples. Society can feel dramatically split between entrenched camps, or an individual may alternate between these widely divergent poles. People can oscillate back and forth themselves. So full disclosure, I had my first COVID vaccine shot 2 days ago. See, there's the, right there. It was the Pfizer vaccine here in Victoria. However, I have many friends and family members I care deeply about who are choosing not to get vaccinated. And, I don't feel like I'm not an activist in this area. One of the main themes during this Saturn-Uranus square is everyone is afraid of losing their freedoms. All of us are afraid. And this, losing Saturn, our freedoms. And think of that alternation between BPM2, the constricted no exit stage of birth, connected with Saturn, and then the ecstatic freedom and liberation of BPM4, Uranus, connected with Uranus. And there's a tense interplay between those states. People have a sense that they can go from a state of freedom to a state of constriction or entrapment, or being oppressed by some other groups. I don't know anyone who's talking about forcing people to get vaccines. So, there's a kind of a scientific discussions happening, though it's pretty one-sided. It seems like the vast majority of medical professionals and scientists are pro-vaccine, though I realize not all, but it seems like the vast majority. But I don't know of anyone who is talking about forcing people to get vaccines. So anyway, I am not a medical expert, and this is not meant to be a summary of the scientific evidence, but rather an attempt to see a common archetypal thread in the current sociological polarities around vaccines. So I've identified 5 major narratives that are common right now. So the majority of the medical profession. So just sort of from that point of view. So vaccines are a Promethean medical breakthrough, Uranus, that will save millions of lives and help us overcome the COVID pandemic, which is a serious threat, Saturn, to humanity's health. People who are uneducated or have been misinformed by vested ideological interests, Saturn, against vaccines or acting irresponsibly, Uranus. They would see this as a kind of misplaced rebellion. Their behavior increases the risk of dangerous Saturn variants, Uranus, this sort of variant, this sort of mutation is a kind of a function of Uranus emerging, which could undermine Saturn, our freedoms, Uranus, even more. As a profession, we investigate side effects seriously and stop administration of a vaccine when genuine side effects are confirmed. And we've seen this recently with the AstraZeneca vaccine. It was halted in many parts of the world, and also the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. To just a little more sort of medical explanation, the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines don't include any virus within them. There's no actual COVID virus in them. Instead, they use genetic code, messenger RNA or mRNA, to activate a few of our own cells, the cells around the area of the vaccination, to become spike protein factories. So you've seen the picture of the COVID virus. It has these spikes coming out of it, and that's called a spike protein. So the vaccine consists of tiny strands of this mRNA, messenger RNA, encased in fat, a lipid particle, fat, that allows them to slip inside a cell without being attacked. Once inside, the mRNA functions roughly like computer code, instructing cells to begin assembling coronavirus spike proteins out of amino acid building blocks already in our bodies. These proteins, these spike proteins that trigger our immune systems to create antibodies to neutralize them. And these antibodies then stay in our system, and if we're exposed to the COVID virus later on, after about 2 weeks, then those antibodies can easily defeat it. And they're saying 95% of people. The mRNA particles do not get into the nucleus of our cells, so they do not affect our own genetic code. It is not gene therapy in that regard, and there's definitely some misinformation out there about that. The other thing is that within several hours, our cells that have been coded to create these like fake spike proteins to mimic the COVID proteins are destroyed, or they're shut down by our T cells. Within several hours, the process of creating new spike proteins stops. And so it is not something that is just going to keep on creating spike proteins indefinitely, which is another claim out there. The second narrative that I've identified is from New Age health conscious free thinkers, traditionally associated more with sort of left wing or center left people, and also libertarians. So from that point of view, they would see vaccines are a dangerous, greedy plot forced on us by self-serving big pharma, Saturn, attempting to make huge profits by overriding Saturn, our personal autonomy and freedom of choice, Uranus. Vaccines work against Saturn, the natural rebalancing and regulating forces, Uranus, of nature, capital N. We simply cannot trust the majority of medical professionals who, although intelligent, Uranus, have been brainwashed, enticed, or coerced Saturn into ignoring and suppressing Saturn, contradictory Uranus evidence. Vaccines are not Saturn, the savior, Uranus, people are looking for, and this is the worst Saturn experiment, Uranus, ever. The third narrative I describe as the majority of educated Democrats and liberals slash moderate Republicans, conservatives. From that point of view, COVID vaccines are a life-saving medical breakthrough, Uranus, and although Big Pharma certainly has the potential to be greedy and unscrupulous, these vaccines have been tested adequately and their benefits, Uranus, outweigh their risks, Saturn, in protecting us from the COVID-19 virus. They will enable us to regain our social freedoms, Uranus. Now, the fourth narrative, extreme right wing. And it is quite remarkable to see this kind of fusion between the sort of free-thinking, left-wing, health-conscious, New Age people, the traditional anti-vax movement, with extremist groups like QAnon and sort of far-right conspiracy theories. This is, some people have described this as a kind of like a horseshoe where the two extremes bend back upon each other. So from that point of view, extreme right-wing, COVID is an evil falsehood concocted by Big Pharma, the liberal media elites, Bill Gates, and Anthony Fauci to suppress Saturn, our freedoms, Uranus, steal our souls, implant us with microchips, turn us into zombies, advance an extremist left-wing Uranus agenda, block Saturn, our connection to God, and cull the population. We have a duty to resist and rebel, Uranus, against these oppressive, godless forces, Saturn. And then the final narrative, which is not a very common one, but one that I'm introducing here, the transpersonal perinatal overview. So from this perspective, resistance to wearing masks is the result of the now hyperactivated Uranus perinatal memory of life-threatening suffocation in the birth canal, Saturn, in the collective psyche. Brigitte Groff also sort of independently had this insight about masks, this sort of because of the suffocation in the birth process, people have a deep fear of being choked. And there's this kind of overreaction to wearing masks. I mean, being against vaccines is one thing, but to not even be for wearing masks is, is really, it's a whole other level of kind of rebellion, I guess you could call it. During Saturn-Uranus transits, people can feel unusually hypersensitive about losing Saturn, their freedoms, Uranus, because of the memory of being squashed, confined, and choked during birth labor. Memories which are now unusually close to the surface in millions of people's consciousness with this Saturn square Uranus transit and the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. Sadly, suffocation is also the experience of dying from COVID, and people have a great and understandable fear of that. The long-term effects of the new vaccines are obviously unknown at this point. On the other hand, 3.2 million people have died from COVID so far. As I said, I am adequately convinced that the vaccines are safe, but I believe that people's freedoms, freedom to make their own choices should be respected. And there's many people that I care about deeply who are making that choice. I just want to finish with one more news quote that illustrates the fourth narrative, the kind of extreme right wing. So I think I got this from a Rolling Stone article. One of the sort of right-wing anti-vax activists, he's talking about the deep state's Luciferian agenda of controlling everyone on the planet. So you can see that fear of losing freedom there. The mandates are all part of the deep state plan, this person claims, because when you inject poison into someone, you can incapacitate them very quickly, especially if you're doing it at birth. As soon as a soul comes in, incarnates. There's a really amazing sort of reference to the perinatal trauma, the sense that something at birth could happen. I don't think they don't inject infants, or not newborns anyway, with vaccines that I know of. So this activist calls a vaccination of children a deliberate assault designed to suppress their consciousness, designed to shut off their connection to God. And that is a very interesting perinatal illusion, though he's not making that consciously. That one of the worst features of the birth trauma is that we forget the divine consciousness. These kind of extreme traumas, life-threatening events, send us further from the divine source, and there's a kind of a forgetting that happens, a sleep of consciousness as we desperately try to suppress the trauma, and that suppresses what came before the trauma too. We come from God, as Wordsworth said, and we're going back to God. This sense that vaccines will somehow steal our souls and cut off our connection with God, I think is deeply rooted in the perinatal trauma. The real revolution that's needed is the revolution in consciousness, where an individual can undergo the healing quest to face and unpack their leftover birth trauma and other trauma, and then reawaken back to the divine within and without, within and with all things. But without access to that kind of deep work, then there will tend to be extremist ideological projections. So this particular activist says, he says there's hope. If you take the deep state down completely, we take down the vaccine mandates. One of the red flags for me when I investigate some of the extreme right-wing anti-vax activists, it turns out that they also are against green energy. They don't want socialized medicine. They don't want any steps to combat climate change, and it seems to have kind of a political motivations added to these perinatal fears. And so in conclusion, Saturn Uranus is about responsible freedom. It's also about protecting freedom. We all want to be free, and no ideology that is based around taking other people's freedom away ultimately has merit. So the real solutions are win-win, beneficial for everybody, and they respect freedom of choice. At the same time, freedom has to be responsible, as I said. We do have rules in society, like stopping at stoplights, wearing seatbelts, wearing helmets when we're riding our bike, and so on. So these are the kind of issues that are being explored in this time. So the question of the day is, have you noticed any extremist feelings within yourself in this past 6 months? Some new political views or perspectives that you didn't notice before? If you would be interested in sharing that in the comment section below, that would be interesting. Not trying to create a kind of a antagonistic situation between people, but how is that Saturn Uranus extremist energy shown up in your own life? So I hope you found this interesting. I'm offering a 6-month course in archetypal and holotropic astrology starting in the end of September. 21 weeks, and that will include my my huge archetypal slideshow, and which I'll be sending out to people, and then 21 weeks to look at relationship charts, dream charts, psychedelic therapy charts, and events in the news charts. We'll be looking at many different charts over the course of the course. It's $845 US, but it's an early bird rate of $635 until June 1st. So if you're interested, check out rennbutler.com. So please subscribe to ANN, Archetypal News Network, and thank you for tuning in.